Okay, let's get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Nico. I work for Golem, and I'm gonna be your host for the next hour or so. It's Wednesday, and it's already weekend here. So after that live, we're done and have a long weekend. I hope in the meantime everybody is doing good on your side of the planet. At the same time, Alex is also connected. He's moderating the chat. So if at any time of this live session you're having any questions, just feel free to write it there. And at the end of that session, we'll take your questions if there are any. Today's session is going to be the third one in more global sessions of battle tutorials. And today we're going to speak about armies and formation. I'm going to show you three different ways actually of achieving this. And maybe there are more, but this is probably the most casual ones. In the meantime that maybe more people get connected, let me remind you that next week it's going to be a regular week for us in France. So we're going to work for 5 days and there's going to be 2 lives next week. So we're going to take the usual rhythm. There's going to be a live on Thursday about catapult attack, and on Friday as well. And in Friday one, we're going to combine everything we've been seeing so far. So the archery, the fighting armies, the armies information, the catapult. We're going to try put them all within the same shot. So today, armies information. I already made that really simple and dumb scene. Maybe let me break that down for you so we are all on the same line. I actually created 3 different entity types. That's not required, but that will just be easier for me to show you different strategies here. Those entity type are loaded with the Roman soldier. It's more or less the same than the fortress soldier as the basics, but it just have different props. So it has a spear and a big shield like Roman soldiers used to have. I have 3 different types, all loading the Roman soldier, and I'm just going to show different strategies of making formations and different tips I can share with you here. I'm having just a plane, which is quite big here, but whatever. And I connected that Maya geometry to a terrain node for Golem to know about the terrain. So I didn't define any obstacles, so there's no obstacles here within my scene. So characters won't have to avoid anything within the environment. They just know that that's a default plane they need to move on. And that's a Maya thing here, but I made also a small plane here, which is a kind of yellowish, which I connected with a motion path to a Bezier curve. And those 2 guys are animated, so you can see it follows the Bezier curves at a slow pace. So we're going to use that as a base for the characters. So maybe let me start. So you can see here I named my 3 different types like static formation, adapt pose formation, and set formation. So that's kind of the different type of crowd I'm gonna do here. So let me get started maybe with the first one, just how to place static formation. It's really 101 here. It's really basics, but maybe also wanted to share a trick which is maybe less basic than usual here. So let's say we want just to place a couple of characters informations and they don't move much, they just play a regular motions, but you want some organicity. So you got multiple ways of placing those characters. So as always here, we're gonna start placing characters now without we've defined the entity types. And those different ways all rely within the pop tool. So I'm gonna grab the pop tool, and there's usually 2 favorite strategies here. Either you create a grid or you use a polygon as a generation zone. So here you can see I'm having a plane already set up as a grid. I could use the different faces or the vertices or the edges to generate my characters. Or I can just use the regular grid one. So we've been using that one plenty of times here within that do session. So you probably already know that one, but that's not really the point of that demo here. So the static form is going to be blue guys. So I want to mostly populate blue guys. So I could have maybe uncheck those within the pop tool saying I just want to have the static form guys being generated. But if I don't do it afterwards, I can still change my mind. Say that within the entity types, I want to, I need to go in within the pop tool. Within the entity types attribute of my pop tool, I just want to have the static form. So now you can see that I'm only having blue guys. I can populate my crowd, and as I created a grid, by default it creates a 6x10 grid placement of your characters next to each other, following a specific radius, which is the human regular radius you may have. So here I want to have, I'll do only 10x10 grids tonight. So I want to make a grid like this. I want to change the distance. You can see you got two controllers for the distance. They're connected with each other. If you want to be able to, control the Z spreading differently than the X axis, you can just unconnect the two together, and it's really up to you here. Then I can noise position just a bit, because, well, formations are usually like pretty straight, but you can't be perfectly straight, so you want to add a bit of organicity here. So I'm just playing with some random here. As always, I can break, as above, I can break the noise X and noise Z if I want to have different noise depending on the axis here. And when I'm happy with that, nothing really fancy, right? When I'm happy with that, I just press create, and as soon as I will run the simulation, I'll get my characters populating within the scene. So that's my Roman soldier here. So it has a bit of variation for the shield, and some have a spear and some have a sword. So that's the default type here. Let's stick with that so far. And I just want to assign them because they're going to be a static formation, but they won't be obviously in typo. So I want to assign them with a behavior. The simplest behavior we can get is just assigning emotions to those guys. And part of the motion, I believe there's one which is called cohort rest and signboard. So that one is usually dedicated for characters who are actually holding a signboard, which looks like a spear. So you can see so that's the clip. So you can see two feet on the ground. The shield is apparently on the side, and here is holding something which could be a spear, but it's actually a signboard here. If I play that motion on my character, let's take a look how they play well with that. So the shields are not perfectly aligned. It's more, I guess, targeted for that round shield rather than the rectangular shield. I could correct that if I wanted to, but let's not waste too much time with that. I just want to, okay, let's get a first quick and feel about that. So yeah, okay, they're not aligned. That was expected, and that's something we wanted. But the really bad thing about that simulation here is that they're all playing the same animation at the same time. So let's add a bit of maybe organicity here. So easy thing is to change the start %. So I want that motion to start independently at different frames independently for every characters. I can probably like change the speed ratio. I can maybe slow down the motion for some characters and speed it up for some others. So that's going to be just a random range here. Okay, that's better. The head animation is less repetitive here, but still one note you may have is that those spears here are all really aligned, and there's little chance that on a crowd like this all the characters will align the spear the same way. So you may want to add some diversity here as well. So one way to add diversity, I could use the chops as always, and that will end up within the same stuff, or we get just a simpler setup if you just need to move a bone. So here what I want to do is maybe add a noise on the bone, and especially the right wrist bone of the characters. So you could use the chop, but if you don't want to mess up with the channel operator graph, there's just a simple way to just add some noise to a bone, which is the SetBone behavior. Maybe we play with that behavior before, but if we haven't, no matter. Let me re-explain what's within it. So as you can see, it takes this button here at the top of the UI, which asks you to specify a bone expression to add a new bone expression. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a new bone expression. I can add as many as I want to, and if I want, I can disable some of those or maybe remove some of those if I change my mind. You can see there's a column that says bone, so that guy expects a bone name, and here expression. So pretty easy, right? You just have to fetch a name of the bone, so you can use one of those appers. So those appers will just fetch all the characters you have in your scene, and they're just query all the bones for all the different characters. Here is the same character being shared, but there's probably a bone called wrist or something. Yeah, okay. So that's the name of the bone within my golem character. So there's something called wrist_R, which stands for wrist right. So I'm gonna grab this, copy it here, And well, I already know the axis I want to play with, but if you're not sure which axis you want to play with, you can just put like 90 here. So it just tells that the x-axis, rotation axis of your bone wrist R will be headed with an orientation of 90 degrees. So it's really obvious. So this way it will be obvious to see which direction it is. So yeah, okay, that's apparently that direction pointing them on the left, which is good. Okay, so here I just assign a 90-degree offset, so they all sharing the same offset, right? That's not what I want. I want to have some random offset being applied to my characters differently. So one way to achieve that is to actually use a ramp. So I'm going to bring a ramp here. I just created a new one, and you can see it's called ramp with a square bracket 0, which means that's the first ramp I create. I can create as many as I want to. And if I want to assign the result of that ramp to that expression, to that bone, I can just go with hashtag ramp 0, 0 being the index of the ramp I want to read it from, and close this with an hashtag. And I can add maybe a plus something right after, or multiply by something, or I can just combine multiple expressions if I want. And right now my ramp 0, let's take a look at what it does. It returns, so let me take a look. It's a ramp controller, so right now it's just outputting apparently always 1. So you can see that dot here is at the top of the graph, so it's always outputting 1. And for all the values, for all the samples is always 1. My curve is just one line here. And the output min, so the minimum value of my minimum dot here is going to be a 0, and the maximum value will be a 1. So here it will be just 1 being applied to other characters. So that's not exactly what I want. First, I want to have a different value per character, so I'm just going to on all the different samples here on that axis, I just want to have a different value every time. So I'm just putting a line here. Nothing fancy. Then a couple of checkboxes to play with. Do I want that value to be randomized per entity? So if I uncheck this, it means that all my characters which will read from the ramp will read the same value. They're going to pick a red value here amongst the curve, and they're going to play that. So here, that's not exactly what I want. I want my characters to be actually having different value randomized, so I'm going to check this. Is the evolution of the ramp being dynamic? So if you check that box, it means that each entity will pick a random value on that axis. So one will pick it here. That will give you a value of 0.3 or something. One will take here, will be 0.7. And if each frame which goes, they'll change the sample, so they may move in one direction or the other following that curve. So let's stick with the is dynamic, so that gives you a sense of what it's doing, but probably I will move that out afterwards. What's the evolution mode? So do you want to move on the left, on the right, or maybe in a noisy way? So that may be on the left at some point, and that may be on the right at some point, etc., etc. So, or you can loop, or you can play once the curve. And if it's actually dynamic, you actually want to tell how long that curve represents in terms of frame. So if you make a really noisy frame and you specify a really small duration, your movement will be really choppy. If you specify a long duration, that will be smoother. So that's 24 frames here. And finally, what I really want to figure out is what's going to be the minimum value here. So when a character picks this value here, how much it is, and when a character picks that value there, how much it is. So I want to scale that range out. So probably I want to have an offset between minus 20 degrees and 20 degrees here. And if now I run my simulation, you can see that now my characters, they having some offset on just the wrist, which is following that curve system. So it's not exactly what I want here. It's a bit messy here, but that gives you some procedural randomness on your character, so that gives you some organicity. Just to make my point, if I want something which is which has less frequency, less noisy, I can just put more frames here, so that curve will be evaluated on a higher range, and you can see that now it's slower. Characters still move, but it's slower. And actually, I just want to apply one offset for the whole duration of the simulation, so I'm going to remove the ice dynamic. And now you can see the characters as some they really like messy, harmy. They're not really handling their spears in the same direction each other, but maybe that's what you're looking for or not. So up to you to change those values here, the output min, output max. So I hope that makes sense. That was like the static armies I really wanted to share. That sword, that spear trick. It's actually something we made for production. If you look at Hercules, which is a kind of old movie, there's battle shots with armies informations, and they had that requirements that they just had one motion, but they wanted to have all the characters looking different. And this is the way we actually trick the shot. We created that behavior especially for that shot, and that will be really useful since. Okay, so second use case here. We need to have, so those are going to be static armies, so we placed them with some diversity. Now I would like some characters to be controlled artistically. So I created that shape here, and I want my characters to actually follow that shape. So let's first maybe populate that shot, that example. So that's going to be the AdaptPosition characters, so the yellow characters I want to populate within my scene. So I can still take my grid, emit if I want to. Or actually here, if I want to populate exactly where those vertices are, I'm gonna grab my polygon here, I'm gonna go into face mode, and I'm gonna select all the faces of my polygon. And as soon as I do so and I open the pop tool, I have an option here where you can see it's taking the component of your tool, and it's gonna the selected component of your tool. So here I could have selected vertices or edges. Here it's going to be faces, and when you click on that button here, it just places characters per face or per edge. So that's what you're having here. Great. After that, we want to specify that's going to be the AdaptPos type. So I'm going to remove the other types here. So I'm only having yellow characters here, which is what I need. Let's go back into object mode. And just a quick note, by the way, because people always think that that guy here just creates one character per slot, per component. That's not exactly true. You are actually saying how many characters you want to create per slot here. So let's say, I don't know, maybe it's you want to have a group of 4 characters per face. You can just do like a 2x2 grid, and those 2x2 grids are going to be assigned. Each of those will be assigned to a face here. So it doesn't have to be just one character per face if you want. Let's go back with my 1-1 system, and you know what, I'm just going to put my my environment just right below the ground, so we don't have that zip depth fighting all the time. Okay, so when I'm good with that, just create my population, and now if I run a couple of frames, now I'm having my second crowd being created of type AdaptPose. So that plane here is going to move, and I want obviously my characters to follow that. To do so, we could write some expression to do that and maybe steer the particles or attach the particles to the faces, but that's going to be cumbersome. So we're having a behavior we haven't really spoke about yet, which is called AdaptPosition. So that's going to be that guy here, is next to Adapt Orientation and Adapt Ground. So those 3 behaviors are here to control the the basic attributes of the character, being position, orientation, and all the way adapt to the ground. So let's grab the AdaptPosition behavior, and let's take a look at how it looks like in terms of attributes. So it's taking some target objects, so objects we want to be attached to. So let's attach our formation shape. I'm going to select this within the outliner, press Shift, that keeps my 2 selection. I can jump into my actual node here and map the 2. Then it's going to tell me how do I want to adapt the position. Is it going to be absolute or is it going to be relative? So relative means that we're going to look at what's the difference between the actual mesh and the word, and when it moves, what's the difference between the previous position and the new position, and we're just going to apply that offset to the characters. So that just allows to move the characters in the same way than our target objects, but without those having to be exactly at the same spot. If you want them to be exactly at the same spot, like here I want my characters to be exactly on the faces, you just stick with the absolute. How do I want to adapt to that object? Do I just take the transform, the regular transform of the object? Do I take the vertices into account, the faces, the edges, all the components? So that component is only if you're dealing with particles. So here I want to attach my character per faces. And what's going to be the assignment mode? So how do I assign one character per face? So we're just saying entity 1 will be assigned to face 1. And now if I just run my sim, you can see there was a bump at the beginning because my plane was following the motion path, and now you're having your characters following the path they're not animated yet, obviously, but they're just following. And if we pay attention, now we can see that they don't orient themselves. They kept their orientation from the beginning, because here as well we haven't specified what we want to do with the orientation. So let's maybe figure that orientation first. Next to the, that's what I was saying earlier, next to the adapt position, we're having something called adapt orientation. Let's bring this, and I want to influence both the position and the orientation at the same time, so let's bring them two at the same spot. Creates parallel operator. And here as well, I'm pretty sure we haven't spoke about that behavior. That just allows you to control or override the orientation if you're not happy with what's been computed from the different behaviors. So you can tell how you would like to adapt the characters. Would you like to set the heading, attitude, and bank angles of your characters? Or you'd like just to specify the forward and the up vector. So here it's going to be angles. Here it's going to be 2 vectors. And that's a low-pass filter that just helps you dealing with noisy simulations. So actually what I want to do here is control the heading, attribute, and bank angle separately. And what I want to actually influence is going to be the heading of the character. So heading is just direction is facing towards. So that's the heading attributes here in the beginning. So right now it's saying that there's no adaptation, so nothing's gonna happen if I play my sim. But I'm having different modes I can play with. I can specify a fixed value, so I can just provide a vector here will be my facing angle, and that can be animated if I want to. I can figure a PP attribute. I can provide a locator, and my character will face that locator. Or I can say something like velocity based. So velocity based means that we're going to look at what was the previous position, what's the new position, that gives you a vector, and that vector is going to be the orientation in which you're going to face to. And you can also specify what's the maximum speed you want to change orientation. So here speed orientation will be adapt. What's the maximum degrees per second you're allowing? So here 120 degrees per second means that it's 5 degrees per frame you're allowing your characters to change. So just a way to smooth that out if you think that they're just orienting too fast. Okay, let's take a new look at what's gonna happen here. So now the characters are following the velocity, and obviously, well, hopefully if everything goes well according to the plan, when they change orientation, that now you can see that the characters are following that orientation. Okay, not so bad. So they're not animated yet. Probably my curve is not smooth enough here. I'm not a good artist. So you figure something which is better in terms of tangents and making something smoother for the curve. And probably also you can, I'm not sure, well, you can probably do that within Maya, but you can probably deform the mesh according to the curve as well to get something more organic. Here they really like a square aesthetic shape, but that's just to give you the idea. So what if I want to animate those guys? Here, as always, I'm having my particles moving. So what I want to do is follow that particle. So I'm going to use the locomotion behavior. And within that locomotion behavior, I want to specify some clips. So I'm going to provide the walk animation, my rest signboard, probably. Well, not really sure. Well, let's just provide. Well, you know what? Let's provide the walk signboard and the rest signboard. So I don't have probably enough animation here to get something proper. I mean, I don't have any turns or whatsoever, so it's probably gonna be chunky. But let's see. Yeah, obviously. So yeah, sure. I totally forgot about that. So what's happening is here at the first frame, my characters actually change position like super fast. That's not something obvious, but when we do the adapt ground, when we do the adapt position here, we are assigning entity ID to component ID. So it means that entity 1 will be assigned to face 1. But there's little chance that entity 1 will be this one and entity 2 will be this one. So they just randomly scattered here. So one thing I should do is probably start the locomotion like after my positioning being changed. So I can just block the locomotion for maybe 10 frames. So first, my adapt position changes the position of my entities. I'm not sure that's gonna work. And yeah, it does. And then the locomotion follows. And you have your characters walking with the spears. Probably you can add an offset like we did before. And yeah, that was what I was like fearing here. You can see here it's going faster than what we're having in terms of animation. So that's not really realistic here. We lose the shape because the locomotion can't catch up with the shape, with the speed of my plane. So I could like slow down my plane if I wanted to, or really one dirty mode I can use is to say, you know what, I don't want that locomotion behavior to follow anymore. I just want him to being just snapped on those faces. So let me just figure that. So I want to change the locomotion attribute, and I don't want to use the follow mode, which tells I'm just following the particles. Here I want to use the direct mode, so it means that the characters will be like completely following exactly what the particle position is, and I'll get something better. Here we go. If we want some, you know, variation on the faces here, because they are actually all like moving the same feet at the same time, we can also randomize the start % here and play with a couple of parameters here. Maybe one thing I also want to do, you know what, I totally forgot what I wanted to do. Never mind. If that comes to my mind later, I'll go back to that. Okay, not so bad. Now they're following the shape. Orientation will be maybe a bit too much here. I can see my character drifting because that they're following on the edge. The speed on the edge of those faces here is super fast, and it shifts on the bed. So this is where probably my polygon would have to be deformed by the curve as well, instead of staying like a big square. If I want to fix that, that's something I can go within the adapt orientation here, and say that I want to bound to some specific value, so I would have to play with different values there. Okay, let me try to figure that last case here. So something we don't really speak much is also we have something which is called formations and group entity types. So I can see the time is flying, so I'll probably go super fast through that. But what happens is sometimes you may want to specify behaviors on the group level. Here we're specifying behaviors on, you know, each character gets assigned with a behavior, and we just synchronize characters together. But sometimes you want to synchronize characters as a group. So to do that, we have something which is called group entity types. So we got the regular entity types, which just for each individual you set up your behaviors. But if you want to set up something as a group, you can create a group entity type. It's not used much, but still it can be handy in some situations. So it's not within the shelf, it's actually within the menu. So you got the entity type node, but also the group entity type node. When you create this, it creates a new group entity type. You can see the icon is slightly different. You can see multiple characters stacked on top of each other. And we're going to call that SetForm GroupeType. Okay. The SetForm GroupeType asks you what's the entity types you want to take as a group. So here you want to tell that this entity type here, SetForm type, is actually the type you want to play with. So I'm going to select that SetForm type here and assign it to it. I can have multiple types if I wanted to. Groups can be, maybe as an example, to figure that out yourself. Groups can be used for locomotion, for example. Let's say you want to make a city environment with some families. So families or friends will move together as a group. They will stick together as a group of 3, 4, 5. You can use the group entity types to actually specify this is going to be one group of 5, one group of 3, one group of 2, and you may have multiple entity types. You'll have maybe the woman type, the man type, the child type, the cat and dogs type, whatever. But you can just assign multiple types, entity types, to group entity types. Okay, so now I'm saying those guys are going to be, the SetForm type is going to be my group. Next, within the populate tool, let's create a grid once again, 10 by 10. Here we go. And within that 10 by 10, I want to specify that, well, let's change the distance as well. Noise distance, noise the positions a bit. And I want to only have the SetForm type, which are going to be the green guys. And you can see here, there's a panel which is closed by default, but here it's saying, how would you like to assign some groups to those guys? Because you can create some SetForm type without saying they're part of the group. But if they're part of the group, you can add some specific behaviors in them. So here I'm going to say, you know what, they're part also of something called SetForm GroupeType. Here we go. And when I'm going to populate those, they're going to end up with a a new attribute which will tell they're part of the same group. And I'm going to stick with the 1 group min size, max size, which just tells that the characters belong to the same group. But you can also tell, this is where you can tell, you know what, I want to make groups of 3 people, 5 people, 4 people. So you just specify a min and max between 3 and 5, and it's going to group characters based on distance by 3 and 3, 4, 5 clusters. So, okay, all good. I'm going to create this, and that doesn't make any difference. If I press play here, I end up with my types as I ended before. But now they're having something more specific that I can play with. So that group entity type is also a type you can assign behaviors on. But not all behaviors, that's the point. So one behavior you can play with is the SetFormation behavior. So you can assign a formation to your characters. So they're already into a formation, but let's say I'm not happy with that formation. So I would like them to follow, I don't know. You know what? I'm gonna not make a grid. Maybe I can draw something here. Let's draw something. Let's draw something like, well, let's say it's kind of a fish. I want to have 100 slots within this. And okay, and yeah, more or less. And I want my characters to follow that shape. So I can say within that set formation that the formations I want to follow is going to be my pop tool shape 4. So my pop tool shape 4 is going to be my red shape I just created. And what's the assignment? I can say, let me just figure if this is working properly, and if it does. Oh, wait a minute. I also need to say to my characters, wait a minute. So there's apparently an error here with do start, I don't care. Motion pass follow, I don't care. Locomotion not being synchronized. Okay. Formation pop tool. What about this one here? You know what? Probably I need to add more behaviors to do that. So I assign them a formation, but probably I need them to specify that. Oh, no, I know. Sorry about that. I know. So here I just say, okay, my group here is going to be made of that formation. So that's the group behavior, right? It's just saying at the group level that each entity should follow the slots is next to and getting assigned to. But on my individual entities as well, so on my green guys as well, I need to specify some behaviors, and actually I need to specify what's the steering rules, how fast you're able to follow and go into that shape. So I need to bring a navigation behavior. This is where I'm going to define what's the speed of my characters, the acceleration, how fast they turn. So the individual behavior here will be specified with a navigation behavior, and now I expect that now my characters, okay, now my characters, they're gonna get a sign with one of those, and they will just go into that shape. Probably I don't want them to move. I actually want them to get assigned to that shape on their spot. So I want them to transform from that square to that fishy shape. So you can see that now my characters are kind of taking the shape of this here. So I want to change my SetFormation group, and I want to probably uncheck this and see if that changed something. Yeah, here we go. So now we're having those characters which are actually following the shape, but from where they are. So they taking some time depending on the steering rules we've been providing, and maybe there's some spots which are not available to some of the characters, so they will get stuck. It's always a better idea to make shapes which are next to each other, so make transitions between shapes. So that's just a way, you know, to change the shape of your characters. If you have a shot where the characters need to go from a round to a circle, that's something which can be done with the SetFormation stuff. So let's say I'm happy actually with the pop tool shape square they're in. So I'm just gonna say, okay, you know what, the formation I want you to follow is gonna be that one here. So I want you to match the formation pop tool. So I'm gonna check the formation pop tool box, and now I can specify to that formation here that I'm actually happy with that formation, and I want them to go somewhere. So I want to assign them with a go-to behavior. So I want to say to that formation, please go somewhere. So I'm going to assign a go-to behavior here. I want to create a target for that group to reach. So I'm going to put, let's say, that target here. Here, I want to say this is where I need you to go. So I want you to use, once again, target pop tool. So I want to use the a purple target there. And as a group, I want you also to avoid other characters and other groups. So I'm going to specify also a navigation behavior to specify that there's an avoidance strategy compared to different groups. So let's say you make multiple formations. It means that you can have formations avoiding each other as a group, as a bunch, rather than scattering the characters and having people going through that formation here. And let's see how it goes. And probably I will have to change my assignment mode here. Let me figure that out. Direct. So that's just, that's how you assign the slots in your formations per character. So that's the same kind of thing we had before. How do you want to assign entity 1 on slot 1 or something else? So you got different strategies here. Direct just means that you're going to take the same ID than the one you're having. And you should have your characters all moving. Okay. I'm not really sure why those guys are not moving, but I'll try to figure that. Probably, wait a minute. So, let's check. I assign them with a go-to behavior on the group level to say, yeah, that's it. I assign them with a navigation as well. I assign some, I assigned some navigation here. That was working before when I prepared that course today. Slot assignment is going to be direct. The pop tool shape is going to be that one. Okay, well, I'm not sure. You know what? I'll figure that out during the Q&A session because I kind of went almost over time here. So if you guys got questions, that's the right time to ask it. And let's see how I can tackle that. And if you don't, I can actually show you maybe another case, another like strategies to make your formations. So yeah, let's go. And in the meantime, feel free also to share what you're doing for a living. Are you an artist? Are you just an hobbyist? If you're an artist, what's your actual position? So okay, let me figure the different other questions within the chat box. Alex is asking, how are you? So I'm good, thanks for asking. I hope you guys doing good as well. Eduardo is also asking, can I populate by face area? Probably I answered that one already. And I'll let you guys ask more questions. You know what? I'm going to try figuring that out, and probably when I'm do the session next week, combining all together. If I figure my issue, so I'm going to save the scene. If I figure my issue, I'll let you know, so you can maybe refer to that video if you're actually trying to follow this. We also have a tutorial which is called Use SetFormation Behavior. I'm not using that behavior much, so I may have missed something obvious here. But never mind, I'll figure that out off. In the meantime, I'll let you guys think about questions if you may have, but if you check the assets pack, there's actually a scene which comes within it, which is called Charging Army, I believe. And I already talked about that scene before, but that's a scene we made, and that may have been used into a popular TV show, kind of the same setup here. And you can see we're having also armies informations there. They're using the Roman soldier, and you can see those horses making lines and avoiding the characters and turning right after that line. And you can see those guys are animated. That formation is animated as well. So you got the curves moving, and when the curve moves, you got your formations following behind. And if you've been following the previous sessions, that's always using, it's a dedicated navigation strategy here, because you want to have all that domino effect that when the row in front of you moves, you want some delay, but then you want your characters to move. So that's really something where you could do that with maybe planes that you animate face by face. or lane by lane, and have the adapt position strategy than the one I showed. That's one way of doing it, but that means doing a lot of manual labor here, and your scene will not be really flexible, which means if you're being asked to add more character here, or maybe more character in the background, you'll have to make more meshes, duplicate them, probably add some variation to them. So not really convenient. If you want to have something more, if you got some time to dedicate to this, you can also take advantage of the chops. So here my characters have, as always, they have a sensor. So probably that's going to be a small sensor, so like something like this. So that's it's just my cylinder here, which gets assigned to each character. And those sensors are allowed to fill other characters. So you can see that guy here is actually filling. So he's filtering what's going on. So this is what he's filling. So he's filling that next on this left, there's someone, and in front of them, like right in front, there's someone, right in front on the left, there's someone as well. But in front on the right, there's nobody. And if we check that guy here, you can see he's filling someone on his left, someone on his right, someone behind him. So they all have their own perception, and we're filtering what we actually perceive. So we just want to perceive what's really next to us, like really close to us, and just in front of us. So when that zone gets empty, we just ask the characters to move forward, and that's it. And as soon as it grows up, and it gets filled with characters, when you get close enough by characters, you just change the speed to make them slowing down. So, regular, super simple setup here. You can take a look at how it's made. We have a old shop network. So there's one pretty complicated, not really complicated, but we got something a bit more advanced for the horses, for the navigation and avoiding the other characters. But those guys are just like actually looking at what's in front of you, and if that's nothing, move forward. And I guess it's already it's also combined with the line. We can also fetch the line position. So when the line moves, it can also be used to influence the perception. So yeah, that's kind of another setup if you want to have formations and controlling exactly what you want. I can see there were more questions coming during my explanation. So dual characters avoid each other. So it really depends. So let's check what was the answer. Yep, it really depends if you're actually using a navigation behavior, or if you implemented some navigation strategy. So if the question refers to that scene here, they actually perceive other characters. So each character perceives the other characters, and they avoid the other characters based on their perception. If you want also to have automatic navigation, you can use that navigation behavior, which allows you to automatically perceive obstacles and avoid them, but you don't have much control on the avoidance strategy. It's more adapted probably for human characters rather than horses. So this is why when you need to do something really specific, you probably have to design the chops yourself, the channel operators yourself. So hopefully that answered the questions. We got a full range of tutorials about navigation, so I encourage you to take a look at it, and we probably have some live sessions about this as well, which go into much more details about the navigation behavior here. Especially maybe the virus spread tutorial we made maybe 2 weeks ago, where we were playing with avoidance. Can you explain what you did with the chops in that scene? I saw a lot of stuff connected, but couldn't understand everything. I can probably go into just maybe the soldier one, because so the thing is with the chops, it can look messy because we're showing all the behaviors for all the characters all the time. So when you look at the chop operator, you're actually seeing where, and then already that scene has been made in a really old version of Golem, so the positioning is not perfect. But you can see here all the behaviors for all the characters, so that means both the soldiers and the horses. But let's maybe isolate what's going on here. So channel operator graphes are controlled by a behavior called channel operator behavior. And you can see that we need, we compute two different channels. We compute one which is called soldier speed, and one which is not named, so bad to us. So soldier speed and chop output shape 1. So let's figure that out. So that's linear speed, so that's probably my horse setup here. So I'm looking for the red node, that's also the horse. There's probably more here. Okay. So let's take a look here. So that's linear speed. Okay. So that one probably outputs the speed of the character. So let's take a look at what it's doing. So the output is going to be the entity desired speed. So that's the speed we would like to achieve. And desired speed means that the locomotion will take this into account to figure what's the best animation to play with it. Next, how is it computed? It's computed with something called interpolator node. So the interpolator node is just we take multiple values and multiple weights, and based on the weight, we just interpolate values. So let's say the values are going to be 0 and 10. So 0 being the speed at which you may want to go, minimum speed at which you may want to go. So speed 0 means not moving, and 10 being 10 meters per second. So what you want is to have a value which is between 0 and 10, and you want to change that value linearly. So you want to interpolate between 0 and 10 based on something. And this something is what the weight is all about. So the weight, the weight is going to be a value between 0 and 1. If the value of the weight is 0, then it means that the speed that we are going to return is going to be 0. If the value is going to be 1, the weight is going to be 1. The value which is going to be returned is going to be 10. So this is why here we're having a value. Well, so we're having a value here. So value, the first value we want to interpolate between is going to be 5. So 5, I guess, is the speed of my soldiers when they're full speed. Then I want to specify another value here, which is going to be my minimum value. So here it's going to be 0. So that's maximum speed here 5, minimum speed here 0. And you can see it's also connected to a else value. So it means that if the weight are at 0, what do you want to play as the default value? So that's kind of the default value. So if nothing is happening within the scene, then do 0. So just write a 0 speed here. Let's check now how the weights are going to be filled. So there's 2 weights here. So there's one weight which comes from probably a sensor. Let me take a look. Oh, so that node is really far off here. Here we go. So positive distance to change of RE. Is it connected? Is that the right connection? Probably I will have to. Yeah, okay. So there's here a max operator. So that's just taking the maximum value between more stuff here. And it's taking the maximum value between, sorry, it's kind of a mess here. It's probably taking a maximum value between what's the distance between the characters which is in front of you and what's the distance to the curve. I will have to probably there's way more nodes here. I probably will have to sort this out, but I guess here it's taking a maximum value between 2 different stuff, being what's your distance to your curve, which is probably computed by something here around. Not really sure. And also what's the distance to the characters which is in front of you. And if one is above the other, it's just writing that value out. And let's see if I maybe can figure the weight for the others. And it's a bit simpler. Yeah, sorry, it's made with a really old version here. So not really convenient to deal with that. And let's take a look into this. Here it's multiplying 1000 with... Okay, so this is actually the sensor. Okay. Here we go. So, okay, let's ignore that weight here. So weight 0 is going to be the distance to the curve. So remember I was saying that my characters will be triggered by 2 different things. Either the curve, when it moves and the curve is not next to them. What they want to know about this. And I was saying they can be triggered also if they don't have anybody in front of them. And this is exactly what it's doing here. So here it's looking at, with a sensor, it's looking at are there characters in front of you? So how much is it occupied, your shape in front of you? So that's what I was showing earlier here. This is exactly this. So how much of that area here is filled with a character? So here it's 30% of that area which is filled with a character. You multiply this by 1000, so that gives you something which means something in the units you are kind of using. Oops. And let's go back here. Sorry, it's a mess. I should totally clean that scene. Okay. Here we go. And yeah, it's just multiplying this by 1,000 and putting this into a weight. So that just also gives you a chance to interpolate with that 5 speed value. If you want probably a more detailed explanation, like a step-by-step explanation, you can find a tutorial on the website with that scene. We just break down every single node, how we add them, how we set them, and why we set them. That's probably a good way to get you started. In the meantime, I probably like clean that scene and package that properly. And if we got a chance next week, I'll try to dive into this and show you maybe with much more details and explain with much more detail how we compute the distance to the curve and how we use that to weight this. But just keep in mind that that interpolator node that we've been playing with is just a way to interpolate between multiple values here, and just taking some weights here and weighting the values with some inputs. So inputs being whatever you want to, so how many characters you have in front of you, what's the distance with the curves, and so on. That was a long answer for short questions, I know, and probably not like convenient enough as an answer, and sorry about that, but yeah, grab the tutorial and I'll also clean that scene. And is there any chance you folks do a lecture series on ragdoll crowds? We spoke about a bit of ragdolls yesterday, the week before. We were doing some physics. We don't have any plans for after the battle session, so maybe there's a chance we'll speak about ragdolls more into the following sessions. Probably on Thursday as well, when we're gonna do the catapult attack. We may also have a word about physics, because we're gonna make collisions between characters and characters exploding as soon as they're hit by a catapult projectile. Am I good on the other questions? Well, if you have more questions in the meantime, feel free to write them down to support.golem.com, which is the support interface to get in to reach us. If you haven't done so, feel free to download the software from our website. It comes with a PLE version, so which means that you can play with the same exact assets and the same exact features. The only limitation is that it's watermarking your rendering. But you can learn the software and let us know how it goes. In the meantime, stay safe. Have a good weekend if you're lucky enough to have bank holidays tomorrow as well. And stay safe, and see you next week, I guess.